There was a lot going on in ancient Greece, and chances are you already know a little bit about their laws, customs, and culture. After all, there's been a lot of films set in the era. But you might not know the specific things on this list because they're simply too gross or too unpleasant for your average blockbuster or high school history class. Here's what the textbooks didn't tell you. Uncomfortable details about ancient Greece that weren't in the history books. Here's something you may not have learned about in history class. What the ancient Greeks used instead of toilet paper. If you're eating right now, put the food down. This is a pretty gross subject. It's most likely that the ancient Greeks used pessoi, which were round pebbles or broken bits of ceramic. Doesn't sound comfortable, does it? Archaeologists have found examples of pessoi with modern DNA techniques. They were able to discover what they were used for, and even an ancient cup, with a drawing showing exactly how those nasty little stones were used. But there's more. Evidence suggests that some people carved the names of politicians they didn't like on their pieces of ceramic before they used them. Bet you didn't know that we get the word gymnasium from the ancient Greeks. It came from the word goumazo, which means exercise, and the word gumnos, which means nude. The ancient Greeks believed that having a healthy, buff body was a good way to honor the gods, so you got Greek men who would simply spend all their time in the gym. Just like some people do today. That was men, but what about women? Did they exercise while naked, too? Well, they didn't really get much of a choice. A woman who wanted to partake in sporting activities would be seriously frowned upon. The average woman, sometimes exceptions were made for women of high status, couldn't even attend the Olympics, let alone participate. Another reason men were usually naked while doing sports was so that everyone could check they weren't women. Are you ready for something really gross? Doctors in ancient Greece would taste the bodily fluids of their patients in order to diagnose them. Horrible. This is because they believed in something called humorism. Greek physician Hippocrates believed that the humors of the body were blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If one of them went wrong, that was what caused sickness. Some Greeks even believed that humors could dictate one's appearance and personality. That's pretty much the same way people believe in things like astrological signs today. So there was a logic to tasting a patient's bodily fluids. It wasn't done for fun. But it must have been truly disgusting for the unfortunate doctor. If you're a woman, be thankful you didn't live in the time of the ancient Greeks. They had some very strange ideas about women's health and periods. Maybe some of that is because there were so few female doctors. So, the male ones assigned a lot of female ailments to something called the wandering womb. And the number one treatment for fixing a wandering womb was cow dung. If a woman wasn't having her period, her doctors would try to make it happen by smearing her with cow dung. The theory was that it would warm the body and trigger her period again. Cow dung was also used if a woman was infertile. It's thought that the logic behind that last part was that dung is an important ingredient in helping crops to grow. So, surely it would work on a woman's womb as well. One thing's for sure, the ancient Greeks were obsessed with feces. They used it for menstruation issues, for curing baldness, and even for skincare. Ancient Greece must have been an immensely smelly place. One prized ingredient in cosmetics was crocodile dung. Greek women used it to make their skin lighter, a sign of beauty in those days. Contrary to popular belief, though, they didn't use it as a lipstick ingredient. To be fair to the ancient Greeks, they must have been very much aware of how badly they smelled. After all, they tried to ensure their various dung-based medications and cosmetics were covered in some sort of perfume. And sometimes they hit on an idea that worked. They knew how to extract the sweat and oils from sheep's wool to make another skin-lightening cream, and that technique is still used today. We're lucky to live in a world now where contraception is easy and cheap. The ancient Greeks, on the other hand, if a Greek woman wanted to prevent pregnancy, there was only so much she could do. She would probably turn to plants. Historians have uncovered willow, pomegranate, rue, artemisia, and asafoetida as just some of the plants used for birth control. But unfortunately some of them were deadly. Even more toxic was the alleged contraceptive blacksmith water which contained lead. There were other things a woman could try if she was desperate. One of them was a very curious method put about by an ancient Greek doctor called Cyrannus of Ephesus, who wrote a treatise on gynecology. He believed that if a woman didn't want to conceive, she should sneeze immediately after sex and then drink some cold water. This absolutely would not have worked. The ancient Greeks just loved their baths. Their hot air baths, heated by rocks or coal, were places to go, not only to clean oneself up, but to have conversations with other people as well. Baths were often built next to gymnasiums, so a person could emerge all sweaty from a workout and go straight to a shared bath. Wait, what? Just imagine scrubbing yourself in front of several other people while they all did the same in front of you. Doesn't exactly sound very hygienic, does it? And it most definitely was not. To make things worse, the Greeks hadn't invented soap yet. Instead, they used a slab of clay, pumice, and sand, which frankly must have hurt when it came to cleaning delicate parts. Remember how the ancient Greeks loved poop? Yeah, they loved urine as well. So much so that it seems they happily washed their mouths out with it. Absolutely unthinkable now, but simply part of life for someone in that old culture. The ancient Greeks used urine to keep their mouth healthy and their teeth white, or so they hoped. In truth, it wouldn't have been effective. Cleaning teeth and gums with urine wasn't the only weird thing the ancient Greeks did to improve their dental health. There were other unpleasant aspects to ancient dentistry as well. Toothpicks, as we know them, weren't a thing back then, so the Greeks just used splinters of twigs. And dental floss hadn't been invented yet either, so they used horsehair. The ancient Greeks had some really terrible ideas about what caused medical issues. The Greek physician Erasistratus was one of many who believed that illness was caused by too much blood. So the solution? Let it out, of course. Doctors of the ancient world had special tools for letting out the blood without killing the patient. Well, hopefully not killing them. Another way of getting bad blood out of the body was by using leeches. However, although it sounds gross, this one actually worked, and leech therapy is still used today even. Sometimes, in very specific circumstances, the old ways really can be the best. The saliva of leeches contains an anticoagulant that prevents blood clots and an anesthetic that prevents the leech from causing pain. Leeches can prevent surgery complications and have definitely helped save some people's limbs. One single finger gesture is recognized practically everywhere in the world as being insulting. You may know it as the middle finger or flipping the bird. Maybe you've done it to someone who cut you off in traffic. Well, next time you use it, you can thank the ancient Greeks. The history of the middle finger goes all the way back to them. Based on what you already know of the ancient Greeks, can you guess what the one-finger hand gesture is actually meant to represent? If you guessed a phallus, then congratulations. You are absolutely right. It's thought that the famous Greek philosopher Diogenes helped popularize the gesture. Apparently he used it whenever he heard the name of Demosthenes, a politician he hated. Ready to be disgusted all over again? The ancient Greeks, and the Romans, incidentally, believed that the sweat of gladiators would bring them good health, and they were willing to pay for it. Gladiators usually got covered in olive oil and then scraped with a metal tool called a strigil. The resulting oily mixture would sell for good money. Gladiators were basically the rock stars of their day, if you look at it in a certain light. So, everyone was keen to get their hands on something belonging to them, even if that thing was body sweat. Some people would go as far as to break into bathing houses and look for sweat that gladiators had left behind as they sat there. Once sweat was acquired, it would be used as a perfume or cream. Bizarre. The ancient Greeks didn't like body hair much. If you're an admirer of ancient art, you might have noticed that most Greek sculptures don't depict body hair. And there were reasons for that. Hygiene wasn't up to scratch in those days, and getting lice in body hair was a common thing. But if you didn't have any to begin with, you didn't have to worry about that. So, how to remove body hair? Well, it wasn't easy. Historians think that Greek men usually used tools to pick them off one by one or burn them off. Ouch. Razors did exist, but they weren't like the ones we know today. Women had it worse, though. They were expected to have no pubic hair whatsoever, and God knows how painful it must have been for them to remove it all on a regular basis. There were lesbians in ancient Greece, but they didn't have anywhere near the rights that gay women have today. The men of the time were completely and utterly baffled by them. Most of all, they were puzzled as to how they actually consummated their relationships. Because, in ancient Greek society, sex had to involve a penis. They viewed sex very differently than we do today. Basically, the ancient Greek perception of sex revolved around who was doing what to whom, or who was penetrating versus who was being penetrated. In that kind of framework, you can see why men just completely refused to accept female homosexuality. But there was still one very famous ancient Greek lesbian. This was the poet Sappho, and she's still remembered to this very day. Her home island Lesbos is where the term lesbian comes from. You might be surprised to learn that having a son wasn't every mother's ambition in ancient Greece. It was still a patriarchal society, but plenty of parents wanted daughters. It depended how you wanted to build your legacy, with alliances through politics, boys, or alliances via marriage, girls. And doctors were on hand to inform you how you could get one or the other. Ancient Greek doctors advised couples to eat hot food for a boy because in their minds, hot equaled strong, and cold food for a girl. But there was something more drastic they could try. If a couple wanted a boy, they should tie up the left testicle. That would, so everyone thought, direct sperm to the right side of the womb and result in a boy. No. One of the most popular gods of ancient Greece was Dionysus, the god of wine and parties. And a popular Greek holiday was a massive feast in honor of him, the country Dionysia. The celebration involved wine, the sacrifice of an animal, and lots of phalluses. For that reason, married women weren't allowed to attend. It was basically one big raucous party. And here in the 21st century, Greece is still doing phallus-based Dionysus festivals. You can catch one in the town of Thessaly every year, for example. People come from all over to celebrate the penis. Revelers can take selfies with phalluses, eat food that's shaped like phalluses, or even buy little phallus souvenirs from gift shops. Dionysus would be so proud. If you were a member of ancient Greek society and you were poor, you were basically stuck with the worst possible clothing with which to cover yourself. Your clothes would be made of coarse, itchy wool. Furthermore, laundry detergent hadn't been invented yet. Soap was used for the human body, but not for clothes. The garment of a poor Greek must have been a breeding ground for lice. Everyone who looked at your clothes could see what status you were, because only the rich could afford dyes. If you were clad in purple, you'd made it. But if you were wearing boring browns and grays, that was a sign of your poverty. To make matters worse, consider where the cloth for clothing came from in the first place. A lot of it was made by slaves. There was seemingly no time for sentimentality if you were an ancient Greek parent. The custom of the time was for you to test the baby to see if it would live or not. If a baby didn't appear to meet the high standards needed to, well, live, it was usually ditched outside where it would die of exposure. Horrible. One method used for testing if a baby should live was to bathe it in wine while it was still a newborn. If it reacted badly, it would probably be abandoned. The ancient Spartans did this as well. There's another society you wouldn't have wanted to be born into. There was a reason babies were abandoned instead of being killed outright, though. It meant that there was a slight chance someone else might find the baby and adopt it. These days you'd be hard-pressed to find a woman with an unibrow, but the opposite was true in ancient Greece. Unibrows were a sign of wisdom and, yes, beauty. You won't see many ancient Greece set movies where the female characters are rocking unibrows, such as our modern-day distaste for them. But in ancient times women went to great lengths to get them. Where a modern-day woman might pluck her eyebrows, an ancient Greek one used black soot to make hers look thicker and fuller. What about the bit in the middle, though? If a woman didn't have any hair growing naturally on that part of her face, she could use goat hair dyed black. This was stuck to the face with tree resin. Sounds incredibly uncomfortable. There's one thing we in the modern day have in common with the ancient Greeks, a deep-rooted fear of people coming back from the dead and tormenting the living. And we have the evidence to say so. Archaeologists did an analysis on 2 Sicilian graves in 2015, and they discovered something disturbing. The bones were covered up with large ceramic fragments, as if someone feared they wouldn't stay in their grave. A history expert called Carrie L. Suliski-Weaver wrote an article about the discovery in Popular Archaeology magazine that year, bringing news of the creepy detail to a wider audience. It shows, if nothing else, the sheer imagination of people back in ancient Greece. Greeks imagined scenarios in which reanimated corpses rose from their graves, prowled the streets and stalked unsuspecting victims, often to exact retribution denied to them in life, she wrote. We can only imagine what an ancient Greek zombie movie would have been like. It was, to put it mildly, not fun being a woman in ancient Greece. Athenian society dictated that a woman wasn't even considered a full citizen, she was simply adjacent to her husband or father. A girl didn't even have the same rights to education as a boy did. Boys were taught reading, writing, and math, but a girl was trained to manage the household, and that was all she got. But perhaps worst of all were the rules about marriage. It was an absolute necessity for a girl to marry, society simply wouldn't accept her otherwise. And yet, it was a girl who got married, not a woman. You see, girls were married off at the age of around 13 or 14, usually to a man of around 30. This is one ancient Greece custom that thankfully is seen as appalling now. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.